The city pulsed with light, as if the night itself had been redesigned for spectacle. Skyscrapers shimmered with hollow ads that towered like gods above the streets, each selling a life more perfect than the one below. A model leaned from a billboard, her skin gleaming with artificial perfection, promising eternal youth in exchange for monthly installments. Another screen pulsed with the grinning face of a real estate tycoon announcing his latest floating condominium tower. Drones buzzed like mechanical fireflies, carrying deliveries to penthouse terraces where no one ever seemed to cook their own food. From 12 floors below all that glitter, Eleanor sat at a modest wooden table in her compact apartment, her knees pulled up to her chest. The glow from her tablet spread across scattered sketches, hand-drawn lines on virtual paper that outlined a neighborhood park. Not the sleek, sponsored parks her city council kept approving, with embedded ad screens and rentable premium benches, but a genuine public space. She had marked the old trees worth saving, mapped footpaths where families already walked, and circled areas that could bloom with wildflowers if they were simply left alone. Her stomach growled, reminding her she'd skipped dinner, but the work anchored her. The hum of the city outside, the faint rattle of the radiator, the smell of cheap jasmine tea. It was the sort of environment no glossy hollow ad ever captured. She tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, exhaled, and leaned closer to adjust a curve in the playground sketch. Her comm device blinked with a notification. She hesitated. She knew exactly what it was. Aunt Regina's dinner, tomorrow 7 p.m., formal attire required. She almost laughed at the wording, so pompous it could have been sent by a monarchy. Formal attire required, as though her aunt's sprawling glass villa were a palace, as though a dinner table were a throne room. She read it again, bitterness creeping in like static. No matter how much she prepared herself, these gatherings always left her raw, exposed, smaller than she wanted to be. She swiped the notification away and forced her gaze back to the sketches. By the time the tea had gone cold, Eleanor admitted she was just tracing the same lines over and over. The truth was pressing too hard on her chest. Tomorrow she'd walk into that glittering villa like an intruder. The family who had raised her would make her feel like an afterthought again, the one who never measured up. But she had no choice. Appearances mattered in her aunt's world, and absence would be noted and dissected like blood in the water. The next evening, the city glittered even brighter. Autonomous cars slipped silently through the main boulevard, their chrome sides reflecting neon. Eleanor's rideshare deposited her at the villa gates with a polite, digitized, "Enjoy your evening." The house was more than a home, it was a showroom for wealth. Glass walls rose 3 stories high, revealing chandeliers shaped like constellations. The driveway glittered with hovercars and sleek sports models, whose price tags could have funded 3 of Elena's park projects. She caught her reflection in the glass before stepping inside. Her dress was simple, navy blue, borrowed from a friend. It clung in the right places but lacked the shimmer of embedded smart fabric that her cousins favored. She adjusted her neckline, inhaled, and told herself it was enough. Inside, the soundscape hit her. Laughter too sharp, glasses clinking, the low hum of background music curated to feel expensive. The air smelled of imported flowers and food she recognized only from advertisements. "Eleanor!" The call came from Bianca, sleek as ever, in a gown that glittered like it had been stitched with stars. Bianca swept over, her lips painted a daring crimson, her hollow watch flashing notifications she pretended not to notice. "Still working on little maps, Lena?" she said with a tilt of her head. "You know, some of us don't get paid in goodwill." The words landed like a needle, but Elena's face didn't flinch. She'd rehearsed this mask for years, the small smile, the quiet dignity. "Goodwill builds cities," she said softly, "but I suppose cities aren't your specialty." Bianca's laugh was too loud, sharp enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. Always so poetic, you really should monetize that. Before Elena could reply, the matriarch herself entered the room. Aunt Regina swept in, draped in layers of silk that shifted color with her movements, each gesture demanding attention. She carried herself as if every sacrifice she'd ever made was a crown balanced perfectly on her head. "Family," Regina announced, raising her glass, "and the legacy we protect." Guests murmured their admiration. Eleanor stood silently, wishing the ground would swallow her. Dinner was served at a long table gleaming with polished steel and crystal plates that adjusted temperature to the dish placed upon them. Eleanor found her seat near the far end, between a stranger, tall, dark-eyed, handsome in a way that didn't feel rehearsed, and Bianca's fiancé. As plates of delicacies circulated, conversations swirled around stocks, luxury trips, corporate deals. Eleanor chewed slowly, her appetite dwindling. It happened halfway through the meal. Regina's voice, smooth but weighted, cut through the chatter. "Eleanor," Fawkes paused, heads turned. "You've been living your little life with such independence. But let's not forget, raising you after your mother passed cost me dearly. It's time you repay your debt. 50,000 credits should cover it." The words detonated across the table, glasses stilled. Bianca's lips curled. Even the background music seemed to falter. Eleanor froze, her pulse hammering. The room blurred, heat rushing to her face, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Interesting," she said at last, her gaze steady on her aunt. "Should I bring receipts too?" A few gasps. Then laughter, nervous, cruel, but laughter nonetheless. Bianca snorted, covering her mouth with manicured fingers. Eleanor sat straighter. Inside, humiliation coiled like fire. Outside, she remained calm. The stranger beside her leaned slightly closer, his breath warm against her ear. "So you rebuild neighborhoods but still owe rent for your childhood? That's one expensive babysitting fee." His tone was light, teasing, but his eyes, dark, amused, steady, carried something else. Recognition, solidarity. Eleanor smirked, the first genuine expression of the night. "Maybe I should start charging them for the property values I've raised." A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Bianca's smile tightened. Regina's eyes narrowed, calculating. For the first time that evening, Eleanor didn't feel entirely alone. Eleanor hadn't meant for the words to come out that easily. Usually she sat silent, endured the jabs, and left with the same invisible bruise. But this time, something about the stranger's timing, his warmth disguised as teasing, had loosened her restraint. She took a sip of water, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. The stranger leaned back casually in his chair, but his gaze lingered on her. Not in the way men sometimes looked, calculating and appraising, but with a quiet sort of curiosity, as though he were waiting to see what she'd do next. "Marco," Bianca's fiancé said suddenly, gesturing to him with a grin. "This is my college buddy. Just moved back to the city, investment group, high-profile clients, you know the type." So that was his name, Marco. His eyes flicked briefly to Bianca before returning to Elena. "Not sure I'm the type anyone at this table thinks I am." His lips curved into the faintest smile. Bianca leaned forward, her bracelets clinking. "Oh, don't be modest, Marco. You should see the penthouse he's renting. It's practically art, floor-to-ceiling views of the skyline. Only the best for him." Elena swallowed a bitter laugh. Of course, another exhibit of wealth, another performance. She looked down at her plate, slicing a piece of fish she could barely taste. But Marco surprised her. "View's nice," he said smoothly, "but honestly, the neighborhood doesn't even have a proper park, no shade, no real place for kids. Makes the whole place feel like glass over concrete." Eleanor's head jerked up. Her heart kicked against her ribs. Had he just? Bianca laughed dismissively. "A park? No one's paying 10 million credits for a view of a playground." "I would," Marco said without missing a beat. His eyes flicked sideways toward Elena. The words weren't delivered with drama, just quiet certainty. Enough to make Bianca falter. A small smile tugged at Eleanor's lips before she could stop it. Her chest warmed, not from validation alone, but from the sudden recognition that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely invisible here. Conversation drifted again, stocks, holidays, gossip. But Elena felt a current shifting beneath the table. She heard Marco ask her a few careful questions about her work, never loudly, just between them. "So you actually design for the people who live here, not just the ones who buy ads?" His tone was light, but his expression was serious. "Trying to," she murmured, keeping her eyes on her plate. "Though people like my aunt call it charity work. They don't see that it raises entire communities." "That sounds like profit they can't measure," he said. Something about the way he said it made her stomach flip. Then Aunt Regina's voice sliced through again. "Eleanor, dear, you've been awfully quiet. Surely you don't think 50,000 is unreasonable. It's hardly a fraction of what raising you cost me." The table quieted. All eyes turned again. Bianca smirked, clearly enjoying the spotlight. Eleanor steadied herself. Her fingers curled around her fork. Every instinct told her to retreat, to bow her head, to let the moment pass. But Marco's earlier words lingered, anchoring her. She placed her fork down carefully, lifted her chin, and met Regina's gaze. "If raising me was such a burden, then perhaps it was less about love than about investment." Gasps fluttered across the table. Bianca gave a sharp laugh. "Oh, listen to her." Suddenly the poet thinks she's a lawyer. Regina's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, until Marco broke it with a slow clap. Just once, deliberate. His smile was lazy, but his eyes glittered. "Well said," he murmured, only loud enough for those nearby to hear. Heat flushed Eleanor's cheeks, half from embarrassment, half from something else she didn't want to name. The rest of dinner passed in fragments, snide remarks, forced laughter, Regina's boasts about the luxury trips she'd earned through sacrifice. Eleanor drifted between anger and exhaustion, but each time she caught Marco's gaze, the knot in her chest loosened a fraction. When dessert arrived, a decadent sculpture of chocolate and gold flakes, Eleanor barely touched it. Instead, she watched the way Bianca leaned in toward Marco, her laugh too bright, her hand grazing his arm as though staking a claim. He tolerated it with practiced ease but gave nothing back. When his gaze slid past Bianca to Elena again, Bianca stiffened, her smile faltering. It was a tiny victory, but Eleanor savored it. Later, when guests began rising, Eleanor slipped away to the terrace. The night air was cool, scented faintly with the imported orchids Regina had lined along the railing. From here, the city lights glittered like broken glass spilled across the horizon. She leaned against the railing, letting the noise of the dinner fade. "You handled that better than most," a voice said behind her. She turned. Marco stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, the glow of the city painting his profile in silver. "Better?" she asked, arching a brow. Most people would have snapped, or cried, or written a check. He moved closer, but not too close, just enough to feel deliberate. "You did none of the above." Eleanor laughed softly, shaking her head. "I thought my aunt would combust when I called her out." "She deserved it." His voice was steady, matter-of-fact. For a moment they stood in silence, the hum of the city filling the space between them. Eleanor found herself studying the line of his jaw, the way his shirt collar brushed against his throat, the faint smile tugging at his lips. "Careful," she said quietly, surprising herself. "Keep siding with me and Bianca will never forgive you." He chuckled. "I think I'll survive Bianca's disapproval." Then his eyes caught hers, holding them with a spark of something that made her pulse race. "Besides, I like the way you fight back." Eleanor opened her mouth, but words tangled on her tongue. She looked away quickly, the city lights blurring as heat crawled up her neck. Inside, laughter roared again, the family still locked in their games of status and superiority. But out here, under the cool night, Eleanor felt a shift, subtle, dangerous, thrilling, and for the first time in years, she didn't dread coming back. Eleanor lingered on the terrace longer than she intended, letting the city's glow press against her like a shield. Each light seemed to pulse with possibility, as if somewhere in the millions of windows, other people were fighting quieter battles of dignity and survival. She wasn't alone in the world, even if this family loved to make her feel that way. She sensed Marco before she heard him move. He stayed just close enough to share the night without crowding her, his presence steady, unforced. The hum of conversation behind them drifted out in bursts, Aunt Regina's shrill laughter, Bianca's high notes of gossip, but here it was muted, softened, almost distant. "You grew up with them," Marco said at last, tilting his chin toward the dining room. "How do you stand it?" Eleanor breathed out through her nose. "By pretending their words don't land." "By leaving before they can see the damage," she shrugged. "By remembering I have a life outside their marble walls." "Do you?" The question startled her. Not the words, but the way he said them, without challenge, without pity, just curiosity. "I have enough," she said carefully. "A small place, work that matters, friends who don't measure my worth in handbags." He considered this, his gaze steady. "Sounds like more than most of them have." She huffed a laugh, a little too sharp. "Don't romanticize it. Rent's late more often than not. My shoes are older than Bianca's last boyfriend, and every holiday feels like walking into an ambush. Yet you came." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you getting at?" Marco lifted one shoulder in a slow shrug. "That maybe you care more about this family than you admit. Or maybe you just like winning battles on enemy territory." The edge of her lips curved before she could stop it. "You think I'm winning? You haven't noticed." His voice dipped, low and smooth. "They've been on the defensive ever since you spoke up." Eleanor's pulse skittered. She looked away, gripping the railing tighter, as though the cool metal could ground her. "Don't overestimate me, Marco. They'll reset by dessert. They always do. Then maybe it's time they met the version of you that doesn't back down." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Dangerous advice. Dangerous man. She wasn't sure if it was a warning or a promise. Before she could answer, Bianca's voice cut across the terrace. "There you are, Marco. I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." Eleanor stepped back instinctively, creating space between them. Bianca emerged in a cascade of silk and perfume, her eyes flicking from Eleanor to Marco with a sharpness she didn't bother to hide. "Don't freeze out here," Bianca cooed, sliding up to Marco's side. Her arm brushed his as if by accident. "Everyone's gathering for the toast. Aunt Regina's waiting." Marco glanced at Elena once more before nodding. "Lead the way." Bianca's smile flashed triumphant as she hooked her hand lightly through his arm. Eleanor forced herself not to flinch, not to show even a flicker of reaction. Instead, she smoothed her skirt and followed them back inside. The dining room had shifted. Champagne glasses glittered on the table, servants circling with bottles that hissed softly as they poured. Aunt Regina stood at the head of the table, her posture regal, her expression commanding. She tapped her glass delicately until the room hushed. "My dear family," she began, her voice syrupy with self-importance, "and honored guests. Tonight reminds me why we endure, why we sacrifice for legacy. Everything I've built, everything I've given has been for this family, even when ungrateful voices forget." Her eyes slid toward Eleanor, a dagger wrapped in velvet. Eleanor kept her face neutral, though her stomach churned. Around her, Bianca smirked. Her fiancé looked smug, and several relatives nodded approvingly. Regina continued, "So let us raise our glasses. To family, to status, to the bonds that make us strong." Crystal clinked. Voices murmured. Eleanor raised her glass with the rest, though the champagne fizzed bitter on her tongue. Then, from beside Bianca, Marco spoke. "And to authenticity," he said, loud enough to ripple across the table. Regina blinked, momentarily thrown. Authenticity, she repeated with a brittle laugh. Yes, Marco said smoothly. His glass lifted, his eyes fixed on Elena. To the ones who build without applause, who give without keeping score. For a heartbeat, silence ruled, then a few uncertain chuckles. Bianca stiffened, her nails whitening against her glass stem. Eleanor's breath caught, heat climbed her neck. The toast should have humiliated her, but instead it landed like a shield at her back, steadying her spine. She lowered her glass, fighting a smile that threatened to betray too much. Charming sentiment, Regina said crisply, recovering with a tight smile. Though in this family we know true value lies in what endures. And what endures, Marco said mildly, isn't always written on a price tag. The air thinned. Eleanor watched Bianca's jaw tighten, watched Regina's eyes narrow, watched the cracks flicker through their flawless performance. It was intoxicating. The toast ended in scattered clinks, some more forced than others. Conversation resumed, but the balance had shifted again. Eleanor felt it in the way eyes darted toward her, measuring, re-evaluating. For the first time, she wasn't just the underdog, she was the variable they couldn't predict. As plates were cleared and chairs scraped back, Eleanor slipped from the table, her pulse still racing. She hadn't planned any of this. She'd only wanted to survive another evening of subtle humiliations. But now something heavier loomed, the sense that the ground beneath her family's hierarchy had cracked. And Marco had been the one to hand her the chisel. She stood in the hall near the grand staircase, exhaling slowly, trying to ground herself. The portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes heavy with judgment. She wondered what they would think of her, a girl with no wealth, no prestige, just stubbornness and ideas. You disappeared again. Marco's voice. She turned, finding him in the dim light, tie loosened, glass still in hand. You make a habit of rescuing strays? She asked, her tone dry, though her pulse betrayed her. Only the ones who bite back, he said, her lips curved despite herself. She shook her head, muttering, You're impossible. Good impossible or bad impossible? The question lingered, playful and serious all at once. Eleanor didn't answer, only held his gaze a moment longer than she should have. The hum between them was undeniable, dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. From the dining room, Bianca's voice called for Marco again, sharp with possessive urgency. He sighed, rolling his shoulders back. I'll see you before you leave, he said quietly, almost like a promise, before stepping away. Eleanor watched him go, her chest tight, her thoughts spinning. She hadn't asked for an ally, she hadn't asked for sparks, but both had arrived, and now nothing about this evening was unfolding the way she expected. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the bruises and the armor, she realized she wanted more. Eleanor had always known her family dinners were battlefields, but this night had become something else entirely, a staged trial where she was both the defendant and the punchline. The air in Aunt Regina's dining hall seemed sharper, now alive with currents of rivalry, judgment, and the metallic scent of status that clung heavier than the perfume misted from the automated sprayers above. The chandelier's bioluminescent crystals hummed faintly overhead, cycling through shades of gold to flatter the faces beneath them. Everyone at the long glass table wore a carefully projected aura, an overlay from their personal branding implants, tiny devices at the temple that pulsed faint blue when active. For Bianca, the projection shimmered with cool authority, data scrolling subtly beside her name, reinforcing her role as top corporate litigator of 2072. For Aunt Regina, it was luxury incarnate. Her net worth, displayed in real time, pulsing like a badge of honor beside her manicured profile. Eleanor's implant was old, second-hand. She'd turned the display off long ago, unwilling to broadcast her meager savings and modest job title to the world. Of course, that made her stand out even more here. In a room where status was currency, she was the one with empty pockets. "Darling," Aunt Regina said now, her tone a velvet blade, "you must understand appearances matter. Your mother left us all with responsibilities, and I bore the brunt. I fed you, clothed you, educated you. You think those things came free?" Bianca chuckled into her champagne, tossing her hair so her diamond thread earrings caught the light. "It's not charity, Lena. It's called reality. But I suppose when you're busy sketching playgrounds, you don't have time to learn basic economics." A ripple of laughter travelled down the table. Eleanor kept her gaze on her fork, tracing its reflection on the polished glass surface. Every word stung, but she'd learned long ago not to give them the satisfaction of visible wounds. Then Marco's voice broke the rhythm, low enough to feel like it belonged only to her. "If this were poker," he murmured, his lips curving, "you'd have the winning hand. They just don't see it yet." Her pulse betrayed her with a quick leap. She kept her eyes lowered, but her lips tugged at the corner. Dangerous man. "Winning hand," Bianca leaned forward, pouncing like a hawk. "Marco, don't tell me you're siding with our little charity worker." "Surely you see the difference between her projects and real success." Marco raised his brows, unbothered. "Define real success." Bianca faltered for half a second, then recovered with a sharp laugh. "Status, influence, wealth, the things that matter. Surely you, of all people, understand that." Marco tilted his glass, watching the golden bubbles rise. "Strange. Where I come from, success is measured by impact, who you lift, not what you hoard." His eyes flicked to Elena briefly, then away. The silence that followed was louder than laughter. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, their branding displays flickering uncertainly, as though their implants weren't sure how to categorize his words. Aunt Regina broke the silence with a cough. "Impact is nice for speeches, Marco, but family requires more than idealism. It requires sacrifice, which is why I expect Elena to finally show gratitude." 50,000 credits, Bianca added sweetly. "Really, Lena, it's not that much. You could manage if you stopped wasting time on maps." Eleanor's jaw tightened. She forced herself to breathe evenly, even as the familiar burn rose behind her ribs. Marco leaned closer, his voice brushing her ear like a secret. "They don't know who they're playing with, do they?" The words steadied her hand. She set down her fork with precision and lifted her gaze, not at Bianca, not even at Marco, but directly at Aunt Regina. "If we're assigning price tags to family love," she said, her voice steady, "then perhaps we should start with receipts." A hush. Even the chandelier seemed to pause, its glow flickering in surprise. "Receipts?" Regina repeated, her laugh brittle. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out her tablet, scuffed at the corners, nothing like the sleek holographic panels her relatives flaunted. She powered it on, the screen flaring to life. Her thumb danced quickly, practiced, and then she placed it on the table, angling it so the display faced them all. A city newsfeed article glowed on the screen. A smiling photo of Elena in her work jacket, helmet tucked under her arm, standing before a newly opened green district. The headline scrolled, "Urban Revival, from Ruins to Hub, thanks to planner Elena Martel." Gasps rose like steam. Eleanor's tone remained calm, almost conversational. "This was a neighborhood you all used to call a wasteland. Now property values have tripled. Businesses thrive, families move in, children play under trees where there was once concrete rot." She slid to the next clipping, another ribbon cutting, this time with city officials shaking her hand. "They said it couldn't be done without massive corporate investment. But we did it with community bonds and sweat." Her relatives shifted, murmuring. The branding implants around the table flickered again, pulling in public data, cross-checking, displaying headlines above Eleanor's name. The quiet woman with no display suddenly had one, projected by the network itself. Urban Renewal Specialist. Impact score rising. Elena glanced at her aunt. Funny thing is, Regina, you already received life insurance payments to raise me, substantial ones, enough to cover my care and more. Yet somehow the funds were spent on trips to Milan, handbags from Paris, dinners like these. The colour drained from Regina's face. You tracked that? Bianca's voice was sharp, defensive. Eleanor's smile was small, controlled. Public records, all filed. Transparent, if anyone bothers to look. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, pulsing with the weight of what had just cracked open. Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands. So, if debts are being tallied tonight, perhaps it's you who owes me. The words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples through the table. Bianca's mouth opened, then closed again. Regina's hands clenched around her glass until the stem trembled. A cousin coughed, shifting in his chair, suddenly fascinated by the bubbles in his drink. Across the table, Marco's grin widened, slow and unapologetic. He lifted his glass toward Elena in a silent toast. Heat spread through her chest, not the burn of humiliation she usually carried from these nights, but something sharper, cleaner. Vindication. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small at this table. She felt dangerous. And judging by the way Marco's eyes lingered, she wasn't the only one who noticed. The silence stretched long enough that Eleanor wondered if anyone at the table would breathe again. Then Cousin David broke it with a laugh too high-pitched to be genuine. Well, he said, swirling his wine, it looks like our little underdog has teeth. Who would have thought? It was meant as a joke, but his eyes flickered with something else. Unease, maybe even reluctant respect. Bianca recovered first. She sat straighter, her shoulders tight, her branding display recalibrating itself in real time. It pulsed crimson for a moment before settling into a new overlay. Top litigator, ranked number 6 in Metro. A silent reminder that she still held her crown. Don't be dramatic, Bianca said coolly. Urban renewal projects make good headlines, but they don't change the ledger. Success is measured by sustainability, not a few ribbon cuttings. Let's revisit in 10 years, shall we? Eleanor's lips curved faintly. By then, maybe you'll have found a case you can win without burying your opponent in paperwork. The table tensed again. A few cousins chuckled nervously. Someone hissed through their teeth. Bianca's smile cracked just enough for satisfaction to slip through Eleanor's chest. Aunt Regina finally regained her voice, though it trembled. You ungrateful girl. Do you think this little ambush makes you better than us? I raised you. Without me, you'd have had nothing. Eleanor turned her head slowly, measuring each word. Without you, I might have had honesty. The blow landed. Regina's branding implant flickered, failing to generate its usual aura. For a terrifying moment, the wealthy matriarch sat unadorned, her real face exposed, without the protective shimmer of curated status. She looked older, smaller, human. Gasps fluttered down the table. Then Marco's glass clinked softly against his plate. He raised it, his eyes warm, amused, fixed directly on Eleanor. To honesty, he said, voice smooth, almost playful. Rare commodity these days. The toast was simple, but it worked like a match to kindling. A few others raised their glasses, some hesitantly, some with genuine enthusiasm. The motion fractured the table's unity, loyalty splintering into curiosity, resentment, admiration. Bianca slammed her glass down, the sound sharp. Oh, please. We're really going to glamorize her charity projects now. This is a family gathering, not a press release. It's a little of both, isn't it? David smirked, emboldened. Our reputations are always on trial here. Some of us pass with flying colours, Bianca snapped, her branding display flaring again, showering the room with golden metrics of her last case victory. Others don't. Eleanor almost answered, but she stopped herself. Silence could be sharper than words. She let Bianca's display flicker, let the table watch the desperation behind her cousin's show. Marco leaned slightly closer, his shoulder brushing hers under the table. A spark traveled through her skin, uninvited but not unwelcome. "You're rattling her," he murmured, just for Eleanor. "Keep steady." Elena's throat tightened. She hadn't expected encouragement, least of all from him. Marco was Bianca's long-time admirer, or so she had thought. But here he was, throwing subtle shields in her direction. Bianca noticed the shift, too. Her eyes narrowed as she tracked the slight lean between them. For a heartbeat, something raw and jealous flickered across her face. That was new. "Marco," Bianca said, her voice honey-laced with steel, "don't mistake underdog theatrics for real change. You and I both know ambition is what drives the future, not playgrounds and community gardens." Marco didn't flinch. He lifted his glass lazily, sipping before replying. "Strange. Ambition is exactly what I see when I look at Elena." The table reacted as though someone had dropped ice into boiling water. Sputters, nervous laughter, the quick sideways glances of spectators at a fight they didn't dare enter. Elena's pulse thundered. She forced herself not to show it, to keep her expression neutral. But under the table, when Marco's fingers brushed lightly against hers, she didn't pull away. It was reckless, it was dangerous, it was exhilarating. Aunt Regina caught the moment too. Her face tightened, horror mixing with outrage. "Marco," she hissed, "do not encourage her." "She's already what?" Elena asked, her tone soft but cutting. The older woman faltered. "Already standing." Elena tilted her head. "Already refusing to bow." The chandelier flickered again as though in agreement. For the first time all evening, Eleanor leaned forward, resting her hands lightly on the glass table. Her reflection looked back at her, steadier than she remembered. "I've spent years letting this family define me," she said. "The quiet one. The dependent one. The one who should be grateful. And maybe that served you. Maybe it made you feel powerful." She let her gaze drift between Bianca and Regina, then down the line of relatives, each avoiding her eyes in turn. "But power that relies on someone else's silence isn't power. It's theft." No one spoke. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed steady. "I don't owe you. Not gratitude, not debt, not silence. If anything, you owe me. For every year you used me as the family's cautionary tale, for every dinner like this one, where you built your status on my supposed failure." Bianca's lips parted, then pressed shut. Regina's hands trembled in her lap. "And Marco." Marco smiled, not mocking, but bright, unhidden admiration. The silence turned heavy again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was the silence of recognition, of an old narrative cracking in real time. Eleanor sat back, calm, composed, while the rest of the family scrambled internally to process the new balance of power. The meal continued, though clumsily. Conversations broke off into fragments, laughter forced, the old rhythm gone. Regina picked at her food without appetite. Bianca toyed with her display, scrolling through irrelevant data streams just to keep her hands busy. But Marco remained steady, occasionally sending Elena those sidelong glances that carried more weight than words. At one point, under the table, his hand found hers again, bolder this time, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. Eleanor didn't pull away. The taste of victory was sharper than wine, richer than any dessert. For the first time, she wasn't surviving the dinner. She was commanding it. And yet, beneath the triumph, another current stirred, quiet, dangerous. The realization that this was only the midpoint, that the night wasn't finished, and neither was her family. The dining room had gone heavy with silence, the kind that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Aunt Regina's fork trembled as it scraped against porcelain, a sound that once would have drawn chuckles or sympathetic glances, but now only seemed to underscore her unraveling. The glossy branding overlay around her flickered with frantic attempts to stabilize her image, keywords flashing sacrifice, matriarch, provider. Yet the code glitched, leaving behind ghostly fragments that didn't convince anyone anymore. Eleanor sat still, the stem of her glass balanced between her fingers, her body calm while her pulse thrummed like a hidden drumbeat. For the first time in years, she wasn't being dissected like an object of pity or amusement. She was the one doing the dissecting. Her silence forced them all to look, to wonder, to rethink the neat hierarchy they had relied upon. Cousin Bianca broke first, as Eleanor knew she would. Bianca always needed the spotlight back on her to reassert control. "Let's not pretend a few zoning permits and playground installations make someone a savior," she said, her voice sharp, but lacking its usual effortless sheen. "This family thrives on ambition, not charity projects." Eleanor lifted her eyes slowly, deliberately. "Ambition comes in many forms. Yours builds court cases. Mine builds futures people can actually live in." The city spread before them, humming with its neon promises of status and power. But Eleanor no longer cared how many billboards screamed someone else's definition of success. She had her own, and tonight she hadn't just survived the family's battlefield, she had conquered it. Eleanor could still feel the warmth of Marco's touch against her cheek long after they'd stepped off Regina's marble steps. The night air sharpened her senses, the city alive with sound and colour. Drone taxis hummed above, their neon indicators cutting ribbons across the dark. Billboard holograms shimmered along the skyline, promoting the latest status upgrades. Dermal branding enhancers, memory optimizers, social rank boosters, all promising the illusion of worth. Worth. That word had sat like a stone in her stomach for years, carved by the quiet cuts of family dinners where she was measured and always found wanting. But tonight, the stone had cracked, and something lighter pushed through the space it left. Marco walked beside her, his pace matching hers without conscious effort. He didn't fill the silence with chatter. He let it breathe, as though he understood she needed time to recalibrate the pieces of herself she'd just rearranged. "You know," he said eventually, his tone easy, almost teasing, "I expected Bianca to have the last word." "She usually does." Eleanor huffed a small laugh. "She tried. It just wasn't sharp enough this time." He glanced at her, and in the low glow of the street lamps, his expression softened. "No, you cut cleaner. Precision always beats volume." She looked away quickly, heat rising in her chest at the quiet admiration threading his words. Precision. That was what she'd wanted all along. Not drama, not spectacle, just the clarity of truth landing exactly where it needed to. The night pressed around them, cooler now, carrying the faint smell of ozone from a distant rainstorm. Eleanor's apartment wasn't far, but the idea of retreating back to her modest space felt too abrupt, like slamming a book closed just as the story began to breathe. Marco seemed to sense it. "Walk," he suggested, tilting his head toward a side street lined with old trees that somehow still clung to the city despite decades of expansion. She nodded, and they turned, their footsteps softer on the cracked pavement. For a while, they walked without speaking. Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to the dining room, the way Regina's branding had flickered, the way Bianca's composure had cracked. Yet there was no glee in the memory, only a quiet satisfaction. Silent revenge wasn't about spectacle. It was about reclaiming space, about no longer letting others dictate the narrative. "They won't forget tonight," Marco said suddenly, as if reading her mind. "I don't want them to forget," she replied. "I just don't want them to keep pretending their version of me is the only one that exists." His smile was quick, crooked. "Well, you rewrote the script." "I think even Bianca realized it." "Did you see her face when I said ambition takes many forms?" Eleanor smirked. "She'll probably file an appeal in the morning." Marco chuckled, the sound low, warm. If this were court, you already won. They reached the end of the block where the trees opened onto a small plaza. The fountain in the center sputtered faintly, its recycled water catching the neon light in fractured colors. Eleanor slowed, leaning against the cool stone edge, the weight of the evening settling into her shoulders at last. "Funny," she said softly. "I always thought if I ever stood up to them, it would feel louder, dramatic, but it didn't. It just felt like breathing for the first time." Marco's gaze lingered on her, his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but attentive. "That's because it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about finally letting yourself be right." The words sank deep, anchoring something inside her that had always been adrift. For a moment, the air between them thickened, unspoken currents pulling tighter. Marco stepped closer, his shadow mingling with hers in the neon glow. "You know," he murmured, "the way you dismantled her tonight, it wasn't just precise. It was." Intoxicating, Eleanor's breath caught. He wasn't teasing this time. His eyes held hers, steady, unflinching, carrying the kind of sincerity that unsettled her more than all of Bianca's sharpest remarks. She forced a smile, trying to lighten the charge sparking between them. "Careful. You sound dangerously like you're flirting." "I'm terrible at hiding it," he said without hesitation, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She could feel the heat rising again, her carefully practiced composure fraying at the edges. She wanted to lean in, to test the promise humming between them, but she also wanted to hold on to the control she'd finally claimed. "Coffee first," she said again, though her voice came out softer, huskier than she intended. "Then sarcasm lessons." Maybe a few advanced classes in subtle humiliation. Marco's grin widened, but his eyes never left hers. "Then I'll sign up for the full course." The moment hung, suspended, until a group of laughing partygoers spilled into the plaza, shattering the quiet. Eleanor stepped back, breaking the spell, though her pulse still raced. They walked on, the city alive around them. By the time they reached her building, a modest complex with ivy clinging stubbornly to the concrete, Eleanor felt the weight of exhaustion mix with something lighter, something that tasted dangerously like hope. At the door, Marco paused. "You don't have to face them alone next time, you know." Eleanor tilted her head, searching his face. "Why would you want to?" He shrugged, but his eyes betrayed him. "Because watching you stand your ground tonight was the most real thing I've seen in a long time, and I like real." Her throat tightened. She wanted to say something clever, deflect with a quip, but the words caught. Instead, she smiled, small, genuine, and pushed open the door. "Coffee," she said, a reminder and a promise all at once. He stepped back, hands sliding into his pockets again, a grin still playing at his lips. "Looking forward to it." She slipped inside, the door clicking shut behind her. For a moment she leaned against it, her head tipped back, the muffled hum of the city seeping through the walls. The night had not given her everything, but it had given her enough. She hadn't needed shouting or grand gestures to win. She'd needed truth, dignity, and the refusal to stay silent any longer. And maybe, just maybe, she'd found someone who saw that truth and wanted to stay close to it. She smiled to herself in the quiet of her modest apartment, surrounded not by luxury but by sketches and models of the community she was building. The city outside pulsed with its endless hunger for status, but inside, Eleanor felt full in a way she never had before. The family could gossip, they could scramble, they could scheme. It no longer mattered. The hierarchy had shifted, and she had walked away not just intact, but stronger. Tomorrow would come with its challenges, its whispers, its inevitable pushback. But tonight, she had silence, victory, and the faint memory of a man's hand brushing hers under the table like a promise. And that was enough.